was a young 18-year-old private. I mean, I'd been in the Army like less than a year at this point. And I remembered one of my senior leaders who I had looked up to. And I looked, and we're in this, I'm looking for that leadership, right, that lead by example. And he was hiding under the vehicle. I didn't feel any fear other than like, okay, I have a job to do, until I saw that. And that's when I saw it, probably the first leadership lesson I learned was like, good or bad, or however you want to look at leadership, is contagious, right? It's like a virus, really. So I saw it, and I was just like, I had to force myself to get back to doing what I was supposed to be doing. So that was probably the most impactful leadership lesson I ever learned.
Welcome to Learning from Leaders, a podcast from Southwestern Medical Foundation, where we dive into a world of wisdom, mentorship, and innovation, exploring the insights and life lessons of seasoned community and business leaders. I'm Michael McMahon, President and CEO of Southwestern Medical Foundation. I invite you to subscribe now and join us on this empowering journey of growth and leadership. Now, let's learn from the best and drive meaningful change together.
Welcome to another episode of the Learning from Leaders podcast. I'm your host, Mason Smith, and today we are honored to be joined by Michael Rod Rodriguez, a U.S. Army Special Forces veteran, community leader, and advocate for veterans. Rod served in the military for over 2 decades, with multiple deployments before transitioning into civilian life. Today, he dedicates his time to leadership roles that empower veterans and enhance communities across the country, most notably as the president and CEO of the Global War on Terrorism Memorial Foundation. Rod, thank you so much for joining us today.
Excited to be here. Thank you for the opportunity.
Great. Well, I'd like to start with the Global War on Terrorism Memorial Foundation. For those who may not be familiar, could you give an overview of the mission and what y'all hope to accomplish?
Sure, exactly. So we are the congressionally designated 501c3 charity nonprofit tasked with building a national global war on terror memorial in Washington, D.C. So that's how our nation builds its museums and memorials in its capital. A charity is either established or tasked with doing so. And that's, in a nutshell, without me going into the 12-hour discussion on what it's like to build a memorial and the steps we have to do, that's what we do.
Well, maybe we'll get into some of that later on, but I'd love to know initially how you got involved with the foundation. What's the origin story?
So I'm not one of the founders. It was the foundation came together in 2015 and became established as a 501c3. When it was just a group of family members and veterans and active duty service members are like, man, we don't really have a space to go to in Washington, D.C. So that's when they started. I was speaking at an event in 2016, working with some veterans, and they came up to me, asked me, hey, if I could help, if I could lend a hand, and they shared the mission with me. And I was, at that point in my life, I had been out of the Army a few years, and the mother of my sons was still active duty. Kelly, she was still serving, and our oldest son was about to enlist, and I was thinking about it, and I'm like, we really don't, wow, this is really different. You never really think about your service while you're doing it or in whatever fashion. So I was like, yeah, absolutely. So I joined the board in 2016, and then that's how I got started.
Very cool. Kind of more generally, what is something that people might not know about the global war on terrorism, and some things you'd like to highlight with this, what you're building?
Sure, of course. So the global war on terrorism, period. Start there. It's an incredibly complex and difficult to define war. Even those of us that have served and fought, and I was blessed to serve this nation for 21 years and deployed 10 times. And my oldest son, the one I just talked about, he just came home. He's been home about a month now from his 4th deployment, and his mother deployed 6 times. So I'm just saying, we've deployed in multiple theaters, but it's important to note that the global war on terrorism as a whole isn't. There isn't separate wars, right? Afghanistan, Iraq, Somalia, Syria. I could continue. Nobody considers Operation Overlord, which is the named operation during the D-Day invasion, its own separate war. Then at what point do we start calling, why should we consider Operation Enduring Freedom, Iraqi Freedom, Inherent Resolve, New Dawn, et cetera, and these named operations that are fought in support of a global war, a war effort by our nation, being led by our nation, their own separate wars. There's several different theaters. So that's the first thing to do. Is there's a huge educational component with building this national memorial, this space in the city that makes all the decisions to send our men and women, sons and daughters, mothers and fathers off to fight. There's no reminder for them, and that's we're hoping to fix that and build this memorial.
Amazing. Well, you've mentioned it several times, both you and your wife, but your military experience dates back to 1992, and you've been deployed 10 times in the service to our country. And for that, we owe you a debt of gratitude, and it means the world. Can you share some key lessons you learned about leadership and being in those high stakes situations?
I think, probably the first leadership lesson I ever learned as my first deployment was in 1993. I was with the 10th Mountain Division. I was deployed to Somalia during Operation Restore Hope. And this happened just prior to the events of October 7th, 1993, which is the infamous Black Hawk Down incident. So I remember the mission that the unit I was attached with, we would get the rice from Mogadishu, and then we'd take it inland to the food distribution sites because there was a famine. And then sometimes you have to fight your way out. It is what it is. So there was a moment where I was a young 18-year-old private. I mean, I'd been in the Army like less than a year at this point. And we were on the two-way rifle range, meaning we were getting shot at and we were shooting back, right? And I remembered one of my senior leaders who I had looked up to. I mean, he's a really big guy. I mean, he's very in shape, very loud, and like, oh, if something ever happens, I'm going to look to see what, and I'm not going to name the gentleman, man, I just looked to him, and I looked, and we're in this, I'm looking for that leadership, right, that lead by example, and he was hiding under the vehicle. Nothing against his decisions to do so, but I didn't feel any fear other than like, okay, I have a job to do, until I saw that. And that's when I saw it. Probably the first leadership lesson I learned was like, good or bad, or however you want to look at leadership, is contagious, right? It's like a virus, really. So I saw it, and I was just like, I had to force myself to get back to doing what I was supposed to be doing. So that was probably probably most impactful leadership lesson I ever learned.
Well, you just touched on kind of a story from your first deployment, and you obviously had decades of further experiences. How did you see your leadership style evolve as you really grew and probably took on the more senior leadership levels in the military?
I will say that as I've aged, you dated me really quick, saying I joined the Army in 1992. So, I'm 50 years old now. But I will say that my leadership has, my leadership style has become more empathetic and kind. And what I mean by that is, in combat and in certain situations, sometimes you have to be very direct and upfront, and that's just the nature of the environment. And if someone's yelling at you, they're not yelling at you; they're making sure you understand the commands, or they're yelling over the sound of gunfire, or whatever else is going on, or the sounds of people screaming, right? In that environment, with what I used to do in the Army, and it requires very direct communication. As I got older, I understood that, like, hey, less is more, and you don't always have to yell. I mean, yes, you have to yell to make sure someone hears to communicate effectively, but I became a little more empathetic and kind to do that. I will say, honestly, I'll be the first to admit I wasn't always the nicest guy. Right, I'll be quite honest with that. I was very, everything was black and white, and if you couldn't do what I could do, you were, I would make sure I would. It wasn't the nicest guy, right? So, I learned to just, try and communicate a little more effectively and place myself in a vulnerable position so I can understand the people that I'm leading a little bit better.
Yeah, I guess getting down into more of the nitty gritty, were there any like specific strategies or tactics that you would use in these like highest pressure situations, especially in combat?
Well, situations like that we typically train for, right? And it's just the day to day. People are like, there's the muscle memory. Well, there's the you exercise your brain too, right? So a lot of those situations where there were high stakes and it was life threatening or whatever the situation exactly was. If you had rehearsed and trained, then you knew what to do, right? Like I'll reference the story I told about Somalia. I saw him scared. But in my mind, I had to keep going. I had to get back into the fight and continue to suppress the enemy so they would stop shooting at us and then we could get back and then get out of town. So it's, for me, it's just having a little more clarity on that.
Yeah, that makes total sense. You mentioned one really challenging experience that happened in your first deployment. Is there any other story or memory that of course you're able to share that comes to mind as maybe the most challenging experience you had to go through?
Maybe most challenging, but also most inspiring. Maybe, yes, most challenging, but also the most educational. And that was my first deployment. Somalia, I was in the Army. I went to basic training, got my AIT, then jump school, and then a few months later, I was in Somalia. I could really point it out on a map. I learned on that deployment that, the United States military, we don't just hunt down bad guys, and we're the best at it. No one's ever been as good as us. I mean, we're very efficient at our job, without a doubt. With hunting down bad guys is kind of a colorful euphemism, but just doing what it is that we're sent to do. I mean, if you look at the men and women that raise their right hand and say those same words that I said, that says a lot for the selflessness and dedication and what they're willing to do, right, to carry forth policies that they didn't write. Right, to do what your nation asks you. For those that will never know their name, we didn't do it for money. I didn't get rich doing that. Just doing that. So, it's important when you see this group to understand that they do more than just that. And in Somalia, it really clarity for me really hit because I mentioned my mission, the mission of the unit I was assigned to. We would deliver food to these food distribution sites because the warlords were seizing it all and taking it. We work with NGOs, various NGOs, and I saw us delivering food to like a town called Baidoa. It's like a 5-6 hour drive from the port, and there you see the true famine. The children just dead bellies, flies everywhere, no teeth, no hair because they're so malnourished. Tens of them, like. The parents are all gone. You have these NGOs stepping in to help them out, and we would show up, and that's true oppression. That's really, I've seen that. That's those kids are living moment to moment. But when we'd show up with the food, those are some of the most. And those kids saw us showing up, and they knew they were going to get a meal. They knew they were going to make it till tomorrow. For all that they were dealing with, I saw that those are the most like those beautiful smiles I've ever seen. Some of the most joyous humans I've ever seen at the lowest, literally surviving moment to moment. So for me, as far as the learning point with those that wear our nation's cloth and serve, we do a lot more than that. We provide hope, safety, security, liberty, freedom, free thought, free will, things that, people in our nation just kind of take for granted. That it's just pretty amazing for me as a young 18-year-old from southern New Mexico, who never really left. I never even flew in a plane until I joined the Army. So it was an eye-opening experience for me.
Well, thank you so much for sharing those intimate stories and inspiring ones. I think us civilians, we definitely do take things for granted sometimes being in this prosperous country. And I just want to reiterate our debt of gratitude for all the military service members like you. I think kind of transitioning on, we'd love to hear more about what it's like in returning from a combat zone. And I know it can be a really overwhelming transition for any veteran. And we'd love to maybe touch on how was your experience with that and some stories from that transition period.
Of course. Before I answer that, one thing I do want to say is there's so many ways to serve our blessed nation. So many. Not everyone has to, like I said, raise the right hand, pick up a gun, and run to the sound of gunfire, right? That not everyone has to do that. There's so many, patriotic serving citizens within our nation that do that, and I just want to be sure that, we say that, right? For,
Absolutely.
It's just like, I want to thank you for sitting down with me. This is your first one, so I hope I'm doing okay.
You're doing great.
But I just want to be sure to recognize that patriotism is not defined. It doesn't just belong to us. And I don't feel any more than or special than you, your family, or anybody else that might be watching this, or no, just we have a part to play. But coming back from overseas, so I will say this: I don't regret anything. I would do it all again. I would do it 100 times. I wish I could still do it. You know, I'm too old now, but it's I don't regret anything. But I also do recognize that and understand once you step into that arena and you do go do, or you're exposed to, whether you're part of it, whatever it is, right? You go to combat, you go to war, you're sent to wherever, and you experience certain things. It changes you. Now, it's a bit of a challenge when you do come back. You know, especially I'll talk about like my familia, my own home life. So like the mother of my sons, Kelly, you know, we're no longer married. She is my best friend, without a doubt. I'll say that every day, all the time. It's just both her and I high-fiving each other as we're doing our jobs in the military. It just really wasn't good for us, and she really is. So, you know, I'm not going to blame the military for that, but that is a factor. So internally, as a family, it's challenging, and even with the family that is part of that. So, I knew what it was like, because then when Kelly would come, I wasn't with her, but I understood and could empathize as much as anyone what she was going through and what she was bringing back. But even then, I couldn't do that, because what would end up happening is we would trigger each other, and then it just didn't go in a good place. So it's a challenge as the nuclear family, right? When it's always a challenge. But then also trying to express or share those experiences with those that didn't serve, right? Whatever, right? It's hard. So there's a term that's tossed around, and it bothers me every time I hear it, because it's not true. You'll hear people say, "Oh, the civilian military divide." There's absolutely not a divide. When my father came home from Vietnam, he served during the Tet Offenses in '69. When he came home, and his brothers and sisters that served, that was a divide. No one spit on me. No one's ever questioned my service. No one's ever, overtly come at me for what I've done. They did. And that generation ensured it would never happen again. And it doesn't. And we will do the same. There isn't a divide, there's a misunderstanding. Because if you look at the numbers of those that have served in combat, let's just compare World War II to the war on terrorism. 11.4% of the population fought. That's crazy. Like one out of 10 or more, right? Like every family was touched. Multiple family members sent their went to fight. Today, that number is like 1%. Depending on the statistics, the numbers you look at, of those service members that have deployed in the global war on terrorism, is just over 1% of the 300 plus million that we have. Now, I hope people don't look at that and be like, "Oh, there's a lack of patriotism." No, I think that should be the goal of every society, where we do have an incredibly efficient, productive fighting force to protect us all, right? Not everyone should have to do what we do. And not everybody can, and that's okay. We all have a role to play, like I said. But with that, there's a misunderstanding. So there's not a divide, there's a huge misunderstanding. And it's, in my opinion, it's got to be more than, okay, you got wounded, visible or invisible. Okay, let's talk about that. Well, no, let's talk about the person, right? And those of us that have been injured, I'm not my injury. I'm not my injuries. I'm so, the guy that's sitting here talking to you, I'm still your fellow citizen, right? I'm still a father, a grandfather, a brother to many. So I think I hope the conversation goes, and that's one of the things we really want to highlight with the building of our memorial in DC, is to look, we're just everyday average Americans. And one of the things I really started talking about as our profile has been raised, I've been working on this thing for 8.5 years now, and people are starting to ask questions, which is great. I'm glad people are becoming more aware of the efforts. Is like, look, I talk people, not policy. I didn't affect it. I didn't write the policy that sent me to combat, mother my kids to combat, or my son to combat, or my brothers, or sisters, right? So we talk people, not policy.
Those are some really powerful lessons about that transition period, and you touched on some personal stories. Could you maybe touch a little bit more on what the transition like and maybe some of the challenges in your professional life? And obviously, you've found yourself as a key leader and CEO of this great new foundation. But would love to hear when you first got back from those deployments, what that transition was like.
Yeah. So when I got transition to work after leaving the military, yeah, that is so unique for so many of us. I was in special operations community, so I was used to working with certain type of people, and that was just the environment. Um, and the communication, like I kind of referred to earlier, is like this how we communicate, and but transitioning is like, okay, what do I do now, right? What's next? And some, be honest here is that some veterans don't have any problems at all. Not all of us have issues doing it, right? I did. I'm not gonna say I'm not, but I don't want everyone to think that like, oh my gosh, they're all like, no, no, no. Some of them do very, very well. Some of them have a plan and they're just set up, and it's just okay because those that serve are humans too. We're all different. Some of the transition issues, probably the biggest transition I had was I had achieved. I was at the apex of my career doing what it is that I did. As a special forces Green Beret and a sniper and all these cool things that people think, and that was my identity. And socially, we all identify. We have a master identity, right? When you introduce yourself to someone, you're like, "Hey, how you doing? I'm Joe. I'm a father of 3." No, nobody does that. That's probably the most important thing, but we don't do that. What is your role in society? That's how we define ourselves. So my master status was that. Finding something comparable to that is a challenge. Tremendous challenge, whatever it is. And I'm not saying because I'm a special force guy, it's got to be that caliber, but it's all subjective. But finding something like that is always a challenge because you feel we have especially those of us that have spent our entire adult life serving, have such a tremendous amount of loyalty to that, and we feel we owe everything to that. It's hard to walk away. It's like a breakup, right? It's like, oh my gosh, how can I leave that when that's my whole thing? So finding that new thing that you feel, again, it's a subjective assessment by the individuals, is that they can identify with and dedicate themselves to as well. Because veterans offer something, they problem solving skills at a level that there isn't a single educational institution on the planet that can teach. We have young 19, 20, 22-year-old kids that are in charge. Let's just talk about the airborne community. They might be a jump master, and they're in charge of the 60 plus paratroopers in that plane, in charge of the plane. And then they're making life and death decisions, jumping out at night, with their fellows. That's just crazy to think about. Like if you ever look at, I challenge everyone to just go on YouTube and look at nighttime combat operation or nighttime combat jump, right, in 82nd Airborne, and look at that. Watch what occurs, and realize there's a 21, 22-year-old kid that planned that and executed that. That's remarkable. It's absolutely remarkable. So that translating that skill set to something that they can dedicate themselves is a lot of us, I shouldn't say them, face that challenge.
Do you feel like you've refound that master identity that you mentioned?
I think so. I've kind of like, as I said, I've once I left the military, I realized that and I'm not speaking ill of the military, but the Army song is "The Army goes rolling along," right? And it does. They don't need me. They did not need me, no matter what. It didn't need me. It needed me to do what I did, but it's not going to fall apart if I leave. I'm one person. I'm part of a team, greater team. So when I transitioned, I saw my family, my kids, my wife Kelly at the time was there, and I'm like, all right, I need to focus on that. So anyone, you can look at my LinkedIn profile, any social media I have. I don't have if you look at my bio, mine says abuelo, padre, and hermano de many, right? That's the most important thing to me. And then, okay, I'm a presidency of this and whatever else is I do. So I've tried to focus on who's always going to be there, and that's the familia. But now working on this project for the past 8.5 years, I think so, because I know who I work for. And I love every one of them that has done what it is that they've done for our nation, for us, to provide us the opportunity to do this here. So I think I've found a good spot.
Well, I'm glad to hear that. I guess you mentioned earlier how the combat environment, different communication skills. You're just under a level of stress that is totally uncomparable to civilian life. But what are some of maybe those military leadership lessons, skill sets that are transferable to what you're doing now in civilian leadership?
Um, and I hope nobody takes this the wrong way, but and it might be hard for people to understand who've never been in the environment, but humor. The general, like humans love humor. We do. We like to, like, even in the craziest situations, if you can find a way to, and it's not a diversion, but kind of a refocus of humor to bring them down, to keep everyone at an operational tempo emotionally, to where they can continue to function without emotion forcing them to make a wrong or ill-timed decision. Humor is one, right? And we try to do that. I try to do it with the foundation. I mean, try to make it fun, right? And because I hope nobody takes that the wrong way. How do you make combat or war fun? I thought, well, man, you just kind of, whether you have music playing or your theme music you joked before, because the reality of it is pretty heavy. But even in those times where things are life and death, we're still human, and it's why people say veterans have a dark sense of humor. It's like, no, we understand the value of it and how it can kind of keep you focused on the now as opposed to getting locked up into our feelings and emotions. So I would say, remember that we're still humans, and there's nothing wrong with being kind.
Yeah, that's really powerful. It's you can always find light even in the darkest moments. I think kind of transitioning to another difficult topic maybe, but I know it's one that in your post-military career and likely during your military career as well, was really important to you, is the importance of mental health. And we all know that a lot of veterans struggle with that in the transition back to civilian life. And how have you thought about being an advocate for positive mental health in your leadership after your service?
I'm open about it, first of all. I'll tell a quick story. So when I was at Walter Reed and going through this, they're trying to figure out all these, from the multiple brain injuries and other injuries I've had. They're like doing this assessment, and then I left. It was like I think 16 or 17 different diagnoses, and they're telling me, the doctors are like, look, given your history of brain injuries, in combat, but also in training, right? And then the fact that I used to box a lot and fight, and they're like, hey, Rod, we can't diagnose it as at this time, but given your symptoms and signs, in which you probably have something called chronic traumatic encephalopathy, CTE, but we can't diagnose that yet. So you're looking at early onset dementia, Alzheimer's, like around mid-50s. We're guessing. We're just want you to prepare you for that. So that it might scare a lot of people. I'm like, okay, cool, I got that. I already have tremors and some other things, and I'm like, okay, I can get that. And they're like, hey, you're looking at this, and this, any one of those things, I guess, would be intimidating. But the last thing they told me at Walter Reed was, and you have severe post-traumatic stress, severe PTSD, depression, and severe PTSD. And I got upset. I could swallow and take all of that, but at that point in my life, I still, in my mind, I looked at like, no, I'm not. I'm stronger than that. And I got upset, and I go, F you. You have it. I got really animated about it. And so I wasn't always this kind guy. They're like, hey, look, before we address any of these other things, we have to address this. Chemical dependency as well. I was drinking like every day. Luckily, a guy I had worked for, a sergeant major, one of my bosses at one point, was in the room, and I was like, I'm not. And he's like, yeah, you're doing that. And I looked at him for leadership, and I was like, okay, I'll do that. So I went, and when we advocate, is like I got sent to an inpatient treatment facility, actually here in Texas, in Denton. It was a 4-week program. I stayed 8 weeks. And it was inpatient, locked doors, security guards, everything. I'm not ashamed of that. I needed it. I was on all kinds of medications, and antipsychotics, very, very heavy medication, but I needed it. Thankfully I've moved past that, but I needed it. So being open about that, I think, is really important. That's how I try to talk about it, because mental health isn't, and suicide isn't just a veteran issue. It's a human issue. It's a human condition. Post-traumatic stress isn't just, you just don't have to go to war to get post-traumatic stress. There are people walking around every single day with that. Depression is a real thing. So I'm very open about it, because again, like I said, it's not just us veterans that face these things. It's everything. As a matter of fact, like you're asking that question, I have a bracelet on right now. So my man, my Kyle is my UPS guy. He used to come out to my house, man. I try to be friendly with everybody, and I found out like last week that he took his life a month ago. And I know all the UPS, but he was my guy, and I asked the other guy, "Hey, where's Kyle? He's with my dog, right? Where's the dog at?" And then he shared with me, and he gave me this bracelet. I mean, I used to text the guy and everything, and so that's an example. I mean, I don't have to look very far to see the impacts and importance of mental health and talking about it. And I wish I'd have known he was struggling. I didn't. But that's one of the things that's just tremendously important, and even it's just providing value to people and let them know that they're still loved and they have something to add to society, because we need them. The second, third order effects of someone taking their life, the ripple effects are so damaging, and in their mind at that moment when they do that, they don't think that they're thinking they're alleviating pain and suffering of others, but they're not. And so trying to make them feel value is incredibly important. That's one of the things I hope to do with this, as a goal for building our memorial, is for veterans to feel value for everything they've given, right? Regardless of what they feel about, like, I mean, and none of us are happy with what happened in Afghanistan. None of us are, I mean, there's a lot, but you know what? I'm not going to diminish the service of those to my left and right. So I want them to, my goal is to make this entire nation take a knee for a minute, provide us a space, and recognize them all. So they will feel recognized whether they want it or not, and impart that value onto all of them and their families, and in the hopes that they stop killing themselves.
Yeah, well, thank you for being so open and vulnerable about really difficult topics to discuss. And it's maybe a bit more subtle, but and just as equally powerful form of leadership. And yeah, thank you again for sharing. Maybe on a slightly different topic and related to mental health, perhaps. One thing we haven't touched on is that you're actually an artist as well as one of your side talents. And could you share what type of art you like to create, and if it's been a source of healing for you?
Absolutely. So I was pretty much agnostic to art my entire life. I didn't realize what art was until I was in the hospital at Walter Reed, and I was part of the treatment program. They're like, "Hey, Melissa Walker, God bless this woman. She was an art therapist, and she was assigned to Walter Reed, and that was her job. And she was like, "Hey, today we're going to do that." I'm like, "What do you? What's this hippy dippy crap?" I'm not. And what do you like art? I'm not. I don't do that. And she's like, "Well, And so she presented a mask. We had to paint a mask, and I'm like, "What do you want me to paint?" She goes, "I'm not going to tell you what to paint." I'm like, "Well, what do I do?" She goes, "Why don't you say something you can't say? Talk to yourself. Pretend that's you." I'm like, all right. And I'm a creative guy, and I think so I'm like, okay. So I started to paint it, and then like my entire perception and understanding of art like shattered, right? I mean, it just the blinders were off, however you want to phrase it. And I saw the beauty of art, the purity of it, the power to communicate a thought, a message, a feeling, an emotion, to breathe life into an inanimate object or presentation or whatever it is, that will carry a life of its own and its own ability to be interpreted by the end user. It's the purest form of communication. And if you really think about it, it's our oldest form of communication. We have cave paintings to prove that, right? So it completely changed how I viewed that, what art really is, as far as an opportunity to communicate and to heal. I'm a physical guy, so my art, I tried painting and different things, and I'm not that great. I'm not President Bush, man. I'm not that talented. That guy's anyway. He's remarkable. But so I got into forging steel, like getting steel and making different things, and of course, I've made knives and daggers and axes, but then I've not transitioned, but I make other things, and I try to make jewelry and some other items as a way for me. How I started doing it was as a way I would take something that was something I never bought, like steel. You can buy steel, bars of steel. I don't do that. I look for something reusable steel, and and I transform it into something else as a way for me to understand that everything has a purpose. It transitions through life. As we age or as we go through our careers, whatever it is, you always have purpose, always. And that's how I look at art, at least my art expression of art. It always has a use and a purpose. So that's what I do. And when I started making it, I would use it as, if I would make a craft a piece, whatever it was, I would use it as a way to show my gratitude or love to somebody or something. Because sometimes, thank you isn't enough. So I would give them away to people, and then other times I would donate them to charities if they thought they could raise some money to support the cause. So that's been my journey through art.
Wow, well, that's beautiful, and I'm glad you've found that as outlet. Maybe I'd like to circle back now to dive a little deeper on the Memorial Foundation and all the work you're doing there, and maybe you could touch on kind of in more detail the challenges you're facing now, the milestones you're hoping to hit, and how you're going to apply all those decades of military lessons to achieving your goals there.
Sure. So, first, we had significant hurdles to get past to get this authorization. So we had to pass a bill in 2017. So I joined in 2016. In 2017, we had to get an exemption from a law that states a war has to be over for a period of 10 years before a national war memorial can be built. I don't fault them for writing that law in '86. No one could have forecast we'd be this multi-generational conflict with perhaps no end in sight. So we introduced the bill in 2017, swept through the House and Senate. President Trump signed it in August of that year. And that's when this beautiful, great idea ferry became a reality. And it's like, oh man, how do you do this? Unless you build a national war memorial museum in Washington, D.C., I'm going to tell everybody who's listening, you don't know how to do it, right? It is governed. Think about it, you're building something, a piece of civic art on land you can't buy with 20 layers of bureaucracy and politics. I mean, I think I could build something in Dallas, downtown Dallas, in a tenth of the time it's taking me to do something in there. And I'm not speaking ill of Dallas at all. I'm just saying it's very, very unique and challenging. So after that, the next step was, okay, where does it go in the 24 steps to build a memorial? In 2003, Congress closed the mall. They said it's finished work of art. That means nothing new has been approved to be built on the National Mall in Washington, D.C. since 2003. There were a couple of projects that were grandfathered in, had their land prior to 2003 closure. That's what they referred to it as. And there's been some improvements of existing structures. Nothing new, though. So in 2018, I stepped in the leadership position of the foundation, and I was like, well, I think it belongs there, but this is not my memorial. So we had discussion groups across the country with our key stakeholders, and they all said, look, it belongs there. It should go there. I'm not a Capitol Hill guy. I'm not a politics guy. I have no aspirations whatsoever to run for office. I don't like passing pieces of legislation. But what I do like to do is ensure that the leaders of our nation listen to our people. So I'm like, okay, I guess I'm going back to Capitol Hill. I met with the powers that be and said, look, this is all governed by a bureaucracy, various commissions and agencies. And I said, hey, look, we want to build this thing on the mall in the reserve. And they're like, Rod, you can't. I said, well, you don't think I can? I mean, I can if I pass a bill. And they were honest. They're like, look, it's against the law. It's going to take you 10, 15, 20 years, tens of millions of dollars. No one's done it in 19 years, in 16 years, because it was 2019 at the time. Everyone's tried. People with far more influence, a lot more money, have failed. I'm just telling you. I'm like, okay, I'm telling you, I'm going to do it. I'm going to try. I can't not try because, like I said earlier, I know who I work for. So then, fast forward 2.5 years after that moment, when President Biden signed my bill into law, granting us the authorization to build this memorial on the reserve, the first of its kind since 2003, effectively, I joke around like I overturned the apple cart, right? They're like, wait a minute, how did this? And all I did, it's important to note, was, I don't talk politics. I speak word policy. I speak people. And what I did was we went to those that have served in the House and the Senate. Hey, look, this is what we're doing. This is what we want to do. And through veteran leadership, elected veteran leadership, they were able to have those member conversations on the floor of the House and Senate, and do a lot of advocacy and work, and that's how we were able to do it. So we'll have to pass 2 bills to get to where we're at. Incredible challenges, but again, like I just if you want me to accomplish something, tell me I can't do it. Like, you can't do that. Okay. And again, this is not mine. This is not for me. I always say I know who I work for. It's not my memorial. I'm just the gentleman trying to take it forward. But our approach is unlike anything that's ever been done. So there's so many things we're doing that have never been done before. We've never built a national war memorial during a time of war, ever. It just hasn't happened. So we're doing that. Never have we existed as a nation where our sons and daughters watch their mothers and fathers go off to fight in a war only to serve in that same war. I think I mentioned earlier that my father served in Vietnam during the Tet Offensive. What would it, when my son deployed to the Helmand province of Afghanistan, both me and his mother were standing there at Green Ramp, which is where people deploy from in Fort Bragg, for Liberty is what they call it now. He was going to the Helmand province of Afghanistan. I had been deployed there 2 separate times. Kelly had been deployed there 2 separate times. And I'm trying to find a moment of solace, like, God, man, I know what he's getting into. And, I've traveled a lot of places. I've been to Somalia twice, and the Helmand province is probably one of the most inhospitable, hostile places for Americans, right? I knew what he was going to get into. He was an infantry guy, and I'm like, man, so I'm giving him that hug of hope, hoping it's not the last one, and we see him go off and get in the bird. I'm trying to find solace, and I'm like, well, this is what my dad felt like when he saw me go to Somalia or any other deployment during my career. But then I was like, this is not what my dad felt like. Because what would it have been like for my dad to watch me graduate airborne school and go fight the Viet Cong? Or my grandfather served in World War II, watch my father complete his training and go fight Nazis or serve in the Pacific. But when I say it like that, and I hope listeners, anybody watching, that should grab them, like, holy crap, that's crazy. Well, that's the reality for so many of us. So, we're communicating that, being sure that our stakeholders are listened to. So we're building a memorial during a time of war. And the approach, again, is very, very different. And this is a lot of the major decisions that have been made have been through the lens of an artist, me. And typically when something is built, they have a design competition, and all these designers come forward. And I always wondered, how many Vietnam veterans did Maya Lin, who designed Vietnam Memorial, how many Vietnam veterans did she talk to? Beautiful design. I'm not speaking ill of it or throwing shade her way at all. I love it. I have a cousin on that wall. But did they have a voice? I don't know. Maybe, maybe not. And the analogy I like to use is, if I was approached by a bunch of mothers and they're like, Rod, we would love you to forge us something on what it's like to give birth. I've been in the room. I've got 3 kids. I've delivered children in foreign countries, right? I'd have a lot of questions. In order, I could, as the vessel of their message, I could effectively craft my interpretation of their message, not an individualistic, idealistic, single viewpoint. Listen to that. So what we did was 2.5 years ago, started a search for the right designer that would have the ability to step into this arena with a gravitas, experience, professionalism that could work in this environment. Designing here is unlike anything else. It's not. And again, I'm not saying it's easy to design everywhere or build. And I don't want anybody from New York or Dallas to call me like, hey, you said it was easy to build it. No, it's not what I'm saying. I said, this is very unique. So I wanted someone that could step in at that level. Credibility. Are they the right person? Right? Are they the right person for us? Do they fit well within the culture of our foundation and our stakeholders? And the third thing, if there are pillars, ability, credibility, to be humility. Do they understand that their involvement in this project has nothing to do with them? It's their ability. So we did that. And then I created a design advisory council of our stakeholders that will directly influence that design. So they've been told, like, pencils down, don't do anything until you understand the population. So that approach has been very, very different. I mean, we started with 177 of the best, some of the greatest, and a lot of people have evaluated that they didn't know they were being evaluated. And I brought in experts to do that. And it wasn't this retired Army guy doing it. You had a dean from architectural school. You had people that design memorials. You had experts in that space. I brought them in and had them do that for me. Because again, I've never been ashamed to admit my ignorance. There's a lot of things I don't know. So that approach and to get to the design has never been done before either. And that's another challenge. You do anything in DC that's different, it's some unique challenges we faced with us. So another thing that we're faced with is it's entirely privately funded. No federal government funds will be used. I have to remind people, look, I'm not the government. I'm not. I'm representing the voice of those, our stakeholders, the average everyday American. So we're not getting any assistance from the government. That's okay. given the broad, diverse, and inclusive nature of our mission, recognizing everyone that served, there's a spot for everyone to help out. I really believe the American people will serve in their own way and step forward and contribute in answering the call. So that's kind of where we're at right now, is working on the design. I should be able to show the world concepts here Q1 next year, 25. I go back to the agencies, start getting that approved. That'll take me a couple years. I hope to start digging by 26, late 26, and done by 28.
Exciting.
I went way far down that rabbit hole in that question, man. I'm sorry, but
Oh,
I
no,
hope it all
all
tied
the
together.
details were awesome. The stories of determination. It sounds like you're going to beat that timeline that whoever the
I hope so.
politician told you. So,
Oh yeah, gosh, yeah. Well, it wasn't a politician. It was some of the bureaucrats that sit up there. Have been there forever.
Well, it sounds like you've really found this amazing channel to pour your leadership abilities and your passion and energies into. What advice do you have for other veterans, maybe veterans that are earlier on in that transition back into civilian life and trying to search for that right leadership opportunity and something to dedicate their lives to?
Well, first of all, I would tell them all that I love them. I mean that. I'm not joking anyway. I would also tell them that they have a tremendous amount of value, and they'll never understand their value until they apply it. So, veterans are wizards. They're the absolute best at diminishing their own capabilities and their own service. And I have proof. When I started working on this project in 2016, the one population that kept telling me, why are you doing that? You don't need that. Why do we need that? Was the actual veteran community themselves. So I always told them the same thing. I said, well, you know what? I would refocus them. I said, well, I want you to think about those you served with and fought with. I want you to think about those that didn't come home. Do they deserve it? They're like, absolutely. I said, well, you think about them. I'm going to think about you. Right. And that's why I started with, I love you. So I would tell them that and have them understand the value that they provide to whatever industry they want to go into, corporate America, or if they want to go work in the service industry or whatever, or if they just want to go home and spend more time with the familia and figure things out, whatever it is, they have value, but don't diminish your own service. Right. That's what I would tell them. And I wish they would stop. I mean, because I never thought I would be doing this. It's not something someone grows up to as a kid, like, I want to do that someday. No. But I'm here because, okay, these opportunities presented themselves, and I know who I work for, and I'm a retired E7. I didn't go to West Point. I'm not some general. I wasn't some high-ranking guy. I wasn't. I'm just a regular Army guy, got out and remembered who I worked for. Love my nation, love all those that served for it, and focus my passion towards that. And I think if veterans that are transitioning just keep an open mind, right, and just apply their own desires, like what is it that fulfills them, I think they'll end up finding their own path, but they have to open their mind, because like I said, I never thought I'd be doing this, and I'm not a politics guy, I'm not a DC dude, no, man, I'm not seeking any power or anything, but this is a position that I ended up in somehow.
Amazing. And beyond veterans, what can civilians like me take from the leadership and service lessons that you've had in your life and apply them in our own lives?
I would say give those veterans an opportunity, right? Like, veterans don't need, not just veterans, but Americans, period. We don't need handouts, just need an opportunity, right? And need honesty. Because one of the most honest demographics going across are veterans. They'll tell you. They will absolutely. They tell me all the time. So I would hope that those that haven't worn our nation's uniform understand that, hey, look, just give them a chance. They've given a lot more than you could even understand. But they didn't do it for self-aggrandizement. And again, they didn't do it for money or fame or anything. They did it for them. Whatever their motivations were to serve, they still served us all. So give them a chance. Listen to them, be honest with them, and mentor them, a little bit, give them those opportunities. But even equally, maybe even more important than that, is recognize that those that have served our nation are you. Yeah, it's an incredibly small percent of the population. But if you look at those that, like my son's platoon or any of the guys that I've met or I've gone to see, or that's the most diverse and inclusive organization that exists is the United States military. There was DEI before there was DEI, right? Now it's just a thing everyone talks about. That data existed, right? Social change and social acceptance has always been led by the military. Always has been led by the military. If you want to talk desegregation, I mean, it was led by the military. Yeah, I'm not gonna say it didn't exist, but look at comparatively, socially, how that happened. Look at that, and then recognize that those that serve, that's us, that's you, that's them, that's we, right? So we're not any different than anyone else, and we don't. I still do carne asadas on Sundays or barbecues, and we're still a regular American family. It's just we did different things, and we all contributed in our own ways.
We're all part of the same collective, same country. Amazing. In terms of the foundation, you touched on kind of breaking ground. I think I heard correctly. Breaking ground in 2026 is the goal, and finish in 2028. Beyond that, what are you most excited about in terms of the future of the foundation, and what would be the goals beyond that?
Yeah, man. Hope I don't get in trouble. There's some things I keep a lot of things close hold for various reasons, but okay, I'll say this: we're presented with an opportunity that no other memorial or war effort has. Meaning that right now we have two generations in the front. My son was 4 years old when the towers fell. 2001. You were 4 years old, right? Like I said, he just came home from his fourth deployment. So that's two generations. So we have the opportunity to engage and educate and continue to engage, because also this is an open-ended conflict, right? This memorial is to the future. Everything that I'm doing is challenging everyone's own perception and concept of what a war memorial is, because there's bookends typically. This is very different. That's why I say it's complex and difficult to define. But that's fine. It's open to whatever. I know people are serving. That's who I'm talking about. People. You argue about all that other stuff you want. I'm talking about the people. So that being said, we have a very unique opportunity, particularly in the digital space, because I always try to think ahead. So in November of 1982, when the Vietnam Memorial was dedicated, I will guarantee, I can't say this for sure because I can't talk to everybody that was there that day, but I will guarantee everybody that was there that day didn't even conceive or think that 42 years from that date, I can walk up there with this supercomputer in my hand that we call a cell phone, find my cousin on that wall. That was only 40 years ago. So why not do that? Think about those things now and prepare for that in the digital space as things grow. If you look at, the growth of technology, even to include AI and its opportunity to bring information together and share it in a uniform manner is just remarkable. So I've heard about this project that the Holocaust Museum is doing. They are digitizing all of the Holocaust survivor interviews, because at some point they're all going to be gone, and that's a story we need to capture and tell. What they're hoping to do, from what I was told, is that through the use of AI and the storehouse of data, that we can go visit the Holocaust Museum and then have a one-on-one conversation with a Holocaust survivor. Think about that. So what would it be like 10 years from now, high school classes in Washington, D.C., and they go to our memorial and they want to learn about it, and then they can, whatever AR, VR, XR device we have at that point, because we're getting smaller and better. I'm not sure if anybody's dabbled, looked at the newer stuff. They put something on, or heck, who knows what it's going to be like. And the teacher's like, hey, we may not need a park ranger there, but hey, I want to pull up, let's talk to an avatar of a Marine that served in the Battle of Fallujah. And they have a conversation, or they listen to a story, and the opportunity to engage, the opportunity to take people to this place. My father's never visited his memorial, the Vietnam Memorial. I think when he sees it, hopefully he comes to see ours, the memorial I'm building for his son and grandson. But think about the opportunity, let's say 10 years from now, I can reach out to guys and gals I serve with, like, hey, let's go to the memorial. But we don't have to go to DC. Virtually, I can take you there, and then we can have our own private interaction there as a memorial, as a service as well. I mean, so those kinds of ideas are really kind of what the future is, and that's when our programming is a foundation. Because after we're not a VSO, after our job is to organize, fundraise, and build this memorial, but then we will take over programming at the site, and that's where that will take the opportunity to engage and educate people on this incredibly complex, difficult to find war. And by sheer virtue of our mission, it's our responsibility to cultivate, curate, and store these stories. Because how incredible would it be if we could just do that now? Is go listen to, like, my one of my great uncles, my grandmother's brother, who served, and he jumped into D-Day, but he served in North Africa. I mean, I have a photo of him, Baltasar, Baltasar Rodriguez, and just listen to him tell stories. But I can do that now. So, 3 days ago, my second grandson was born. So how cool would it be if, 50 years from now he goes there, 60 years from now with his grandkids, and he can hear a story I tell, because I won't be around. So that's the future of this memorial. And again, it's nobody else is doing that, and that's fine. I'm not doing it for the sake of doing it, because it's just listening to people and trying to keep an open mind. So we've been working on something we haven't really not ready to share yet. So I hope me just saying that doesn't get me in trouble.
Well, first off, congrats on your second grandson. That's so exciting. And I love the vision that you're setting out to integrate technology. And yeah, I think some people can be fearful of the influence it might have, but it sounds like you have such a clear way to leverage it to really tell those stories. And I'm excited to see how that comes to fruition. So one of the final questions we on this podcast, the Learning from Leaders podcast, we like to ask every guest. Great leadership is usually accompanied by great mentorship. And we'd like to ask, who has been the most influential leader in your life, and how did they shape the way that you lead today?
Yeah, you guys sent me that question, and I'm going to be honest. I'm like, oh my gosh, that was a hard one to really think about. But I will probably say, I refer back to this individual's lessons that he was teaching me that I didn't know was being taught more than any other leader. And I've been fortunate to be around some phenomenal leaders, and I've learned a significant amount by just watching and listening to, so I want to talk about those ones before I talk about the other one, because I can't just mention one. But like the foundation's chairman and vice chairman, Ted Skokas and Kenneth Hirsch, right? I've known Ken a lot longer than Ted, but just watching their leadership styles, how they build teams and attack initiatives in a wholesome and group building, team building type of way, I've learned a tremendous amount, as well as, of course, the interactions I've had with the boss, President Bush. So those three gentlemen I've looked to, and I'm like, they'll show me things, and I'm like, man. And even some of the our other board members, like Bill Krause, co-founder of Mission Barbecue, his humility is so gosh damn inspiring for me. Man, it's amazing what they've been able to do. But the one leader, or what I've been able to learn, the one that's impacted me also, and the leadership lessons I was taught, I didn't realize till later on, but he was mentoring me the whole time in his own way, was my father. Thankfully he's still with us, right? My father served in Vietnam, the Tet Offensive, and as a child, you didn't really get a lot of time with him because he was from a laborer family, right? We work with our hands, work with our backs, and I'm not ashamed of that. I'm proud of that. Didn't really have a lot. That's not me being like, oh, poor us. No, I was happy. We had what we needed. But when I joined the Army, my father was not really supportive of it, and given his experiences, and that my cousin that's on the wall that I referenced earlier, that was my second cousin, my father's first cousin. They grew up together, 23 kids in one home, 2 families, and they would work, right? And kids worked in the fields and whatever was necessary. So that was his best friend, both oldest boys in both families. My father goes to Vietnam, comes home. Andres goes to Vietnam, doesn't come home. So my father has his experiences. So I think that might be part of the reason he didn't want me to join. But when I joined, I had to get him to sign because I was 17 years old. And he told me something. He said, Miko, look, you're going to be asked to do things that are going to be with you the rest of your life. People are going to give you tasks they don't think you're going to be able to do. Whatever is asked of you, just do more. I'm 17 years old. I don't know what the hell that means. And when my father talked to me, I listened. I didn't ask him any questions. But he said, just do more. I didn't know what the hell that meant till like 10 years later, right? Because that was all I did. Okay, do more. Just do more. Just do more. He never said do your best. I think when people say do your best, that's a subjective term. I may feel I did my best, but did I do my best? I don't know. Who defines my best? Me. So that's a subjective standard to set for anyone. I don't tell my kids, do your best, Miko. No, I said, just do more, man. Okay, you succeeded in that. All right, do more. So whenever everything I've been given, every obstacle I've ever faced in my entire life, personal, professional, whatever, we all have to solve our own problems and negotiate our own obstacles as they're placed before us. I just do more. Okay, I'll do more. I did that. I'll do more. All right, the standard for whatever physical fitness test, this. Okay, I'm going to do more. I'm going to do more. I'm going to do more. And what that did as a kid put into me like a, outside of seeing it, my father modeling it, a work ethic that like, all right, you're not going to outwork me. I'm going to do more. And I'm not doing it in a confrontational, like, I'm going to outwork you. Not going to be, no, I just know me. I can't control the world around me. I can control my actions and my interpretation and my own emotional reaction to that. I'm just going to do more. And so that right there has had more impact on me than anything anyone has ever told me. So my dad.
Well, I think that's a lesson that we can all take away from this conversation and from your dad. So thank you for sharing. And Rod, in general, thank you for sharing your experiences and wisdom with our audience today. Our last and final segment, we wanted to do something a little bit more lighthearted and fun and do our rapid fire questions. So just name the first thing that comes to mind when I ask these. Are you ready?
Oh yeah, let's do it.
What's the best kept secret about your hometown?
The world's largest enchilada. I don't think they do it anymore, but this fiesta called the whole enchilada. It would make an enchilada probably the size of this room. It was a big fiesta. So I think the whole enchilada from Las Cruces, New Mexico.
Las Cruces, yeah. I was going to ask, what is your
Yeah, it's in Las Cruces, New Mexico.
Amazing. Favorite movie?
Favorite movie, man. Gosh, I'm gonna say it's probably a Disney movie. As a kid, it's had a huge impact on me. It was actually Dumbo. Disney movie Dumbo, man. I'm gonna say it's probably my favorite movie.
Best place to relax and recharge?
At home with my sons and my grandson, just being around the boys.
What book are you reading or podcast are you listening to right now?
So I'm rereading a buddy of mine's book, a guy named Michael Easter. He wrote this book called Comfort Crisis. I strongly recommend people read it, but it talks about the crisis that's facing our nation with people who live in a sedentary lifestyle. Michael does a really good job doing that. So,
who's your favorite historical figure?
Man, it's a tie. I don't even know which one I could, only because they faced insurmountable odds and faced things that none of us could really even comprehend right now, no matter how much we know about the situation surrounding their leadership styles and approaches. Is George Washington and Abraham Lincoln. And George Washington's organizing of the diverse views of our nation to stand up to the most powerful nation on the planet, and build this beautiful republic we call home. Man, I don't know. That's like superhuman, in my opinion, to be able to do that. But then additionally, Abraham Lincoln, his ability to ensure that our nation stayed together, and his genuine, humble approach, no matter what happened to him. If anyone's ever read his history, like the guy it wasn't always easy. It was actually, his entire life was very challenging. But he just kept pursuing it, and in their own ways. So the humble approach and the selfless approach that they led this nation. I don't think anybody like them.
What is your favorite piece of art that you've created?
My favorite piece of art? So I've made earrings, and I've only made a few pairs of these earrings. I call them sacred tears. So so my art, back up real quick in case anybody asks you guys, like, I don't have a website. I don't sell it. I've never sold anything I've ever made, ever. And I don't want customers. I just maybe someday, I don't know, but like, it's the way I communicate. So because I don't sell anything, I've been entrusted with relics from the crash sites of 9/11, North Tower Steel, South Tower Steel, gravel from the Flight 93 crater before it was filled in, and then rubble from the Pentagon. So what I started making were some earrings. They're teardrops, and I make one out of North Tower steel, and I make one out of South Tower steel, and I mark them with a north-seeking arrow and then an S on them. So I think they're very simple to make. I love making them. There's always an emotional moment for me to realize that. So I think that's probably one of my most recent favorites.
It sounds like some really special pieces of art. Thank you. Well, Rod, thank you again for sharing your experiences and insights today. And I think both your leadership in combat, but also now with everything you're doing with the Memorial Foundation is powerful. And I think our listeners will get a lot of lessons from you today.
Well, thank you. I hope so. I hope my dos centavos added some value. Very honored to sit here and chat with you and share with the audience, man. I saw some of the previous folks, and when I got asked, I'm like, man, are you sure? Like, what the heck am I going to add? But I hope something I said made some sense, and if anything, I hope anything I said, I hope anyone remembers. I hope they remember that. Many ways to serve our incredible nation, and it's not exclusive to those of us that serve in our own way, but we can all come together and work together.
Well, I think there definitely are some takeaways, so thanks again. We hope you enjoyed this episode and encourage you to follow the show for monthly episode drops. We'll see you next time on the Learning from Leaders podcast.
Thanks for listening to Learning from Leaders. If you enjoyed this episode, we invite you to subscribe now for monthly episode drops so that you can continue to learn from experienced business and community leaders to help you drive meaningful change in your community.